Come on, Evan. Yeah. Okay.
So we're all good to go?
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Welcome. So this is dark mode for your tokens, confidential balances on Solana. So my name is Evan, but I go by the pseudonym Ichigo online. I'm a developer experience engineer at Helios and have been for about a year and 8 months. So I know a thing or two about blockchains. And developer experience is a very elusive term. It covers a wide variety of things that basically work towards answering the question, how do we make it easier for people to build on top of Solana? And to answer this question, an important aspect of that and a guiding principle at Helios is clear communication. And so one of the ways that we like to test this for potential DevX engineers to work at Helios is to have them write an article for our blog. And they're given free reign over the topic so long as they pick something pertinent to Solana. And so for myself, I wrote about privacy on Solana. I wrote why privacy is important, why you should care about it, and how to send SOL privately using Elusive, which is now Arceum, and also Light Protocol, whom we're privileged to work with on ZK compression. And privacy is a fundamental human right. It is essential to autonomy and the preservation of individual sovereignty and dignity. It's important for a free and open society, and it doesn't really matter if you're a staunch cypherpunk or the average person. It doesn't matter if you're doing anything harmful or illegal online. Everybody should care about privacy. And at first glance, it might seem counterintuitive for people to argue that public ledgers built on top of decentralized technologies championing transparency as one of their fundamental tenets should have privacy enabling features. But however, that's not the case because crypto is not crypto without privacy. And so today, what we're going to be talking about, privacy is basically a spectrum of hidden dimensions. It encompasses many different layers with respect to transactions. So for example, we have a few options of what layers we want to keep hidden when talking about transactions. This can be done at the identity, so the sender-receiver privacy, which is basically where you hide who's sending what. And this can be done through some sort of mixer, but the TLDR is the addresses involved in the transaction are unknown. At the metadata layer, we can hide program data, memo text, trimmings, basically through some sort of obfuscation via proxy programs. But today, what we're focused on is amount privacy. And so that is basically hiding how much of a given asset is moving for a given transaction. And it's possible today through Token 2022 because it introduces a new specialized set of extensions that allows for this. So we can keep token amounts opaque while actually having them encrypted and only a select number of people can see it. And this is what we refer to today as confidential balances. And so for the goals of this talk, we're going to be exploring privacy more broadly on Solana with a focus on confidential balances. So we're going to start with demystifying all the underlying math, cryptography, because a lot of people like to talk about ZK, but kind of gloss over it. It's this weird, mystical, magic math that doesn't really make any sense. But it's honestly not that bad. Then we're going to work through the developer workflow and do a short little demo about depositing tokens confidentially in Rust. But before we move on, let's take a moment to clarify a few terms because they're often used interchangeably and it can cause a bit of confusion. So privacy is the broad goal. It's about controlling access to personal or sensitive information. It's about who can see what, when, and under what sort of conditions. And so confidentiality is a subset of privacy. And here it specifically refers to ensuring that certain data like account balances, transfer amounts are encrypted or hidden. And it's only accessible to authorized parties and So yeah, nobody else can see it. So the argument here isn't necessarily complete anonymity, although that would be very nice on Solana. Anonymity more so refers to the quality of state of being unknown or unacknowledged. So we can think of private pools or mixers like Tornado Cash, and all we really see is funds going in and funds going out. What actually happens inside is a black box. And that's only just one aspect of privacy which relates to confidential balances, but it's a lot more broader than that. So within the context of this talk and Solana, when we say privacy, we're referring to the general ability to hide aspects of a transaction. And when we say confidentiality, we're focusing specifically on the data itself, such as token amounts not being visible to the public, even though the transaction still appears on-chain. And so confidential balances is an umbrella term. It's basically a comprehensive set of extensions introduced by the Token 2022 program to introduce confidentiality without actually sacrificing regulatory compliance. But we'll get to that a bit more later. And so it's a catch-all for a range of cryptographically enhanced token extensions, which includes the confidential transfers extension. So this uses cryptographic primitives to obscure the transaction amounts. You also have the confidential transfer fee extension, which is very similar to the transfer fee extension, except, of course, we're encrypting the fees. And then you have the confidential mint and burn, which again is pretty much the same as minting tokens with Token 2022 and burning them, except we're encrypting the amounts. And a confidential transaction on Solana typically follows the following steps. So you have the deposit step, which is usually the first one. This is where you're moving tokens from your public balance, which anybody can see, to your pending confidential balance. So it's public to pending. And then there's a separate apply step where you move the tokens from that pending confidential balance to your available or spendable confidential balance. Then once you have it in the available, you can transfer it to a recipient, but it goes into their pending balance. So anything in and out, it always goes to pending. And then there's a separate apply step again. So the recipient would receive it in their pending and then convert it to their available. And then they have the option there if they want to convert from the available back to their public. So anybody can see it. And of course, if that isn't confusing, I mean, it's pretty confusing at first glance. So the whole concept of pending and available balances is basically there to stop front running and any sort of reordering attacks. It's a bit different because the pending balance basically refers to this intermediate holding area. So that's where any newly deposited or received confidential tokens actually come in. And as I said, this exists to stop front running and reordering attacks. And so basically, until you apply or finalize the funds from your pending to available, nobody can spend these encrypted funds. So there's no, basically there's a hard ordering point. So funds only become spendable once they're available. And that pending apply available step, it's basically there. So if funds are being transferred in, it's not like I can magically prove that I don't have those funds. And this becomes a bit more clear when we talk about front running. So because zero knowledge proofs depend on the encrypted state, so you're making a proof to say I have X amount encrypted. If, for example, Alice generates a proof based on her current encrypted balance, she sends off a transaction, but then Bob sends a very, very small amount to Alice. His transaction gets processed first. So when Alice's transaction comes up to actually be processed, it's going to be invalid because her encrypted or hidden token amount isn't the same as what the proof was generated based on. And so it's not too bad because then you could say, okay, Alice can just retrieve, her new encrypted balance, make another proof and send it off. But it becomes an issue when Bob just continually spams Alice with very, very small transfer amounts, and that basically renders her account useless. She makes a proof, it becomes invalid, makes another proof, it becomes invalid. And there's basically this giant back and forth of just bricking her account. And so to mitigate against this, confidential balances are separated into two parts. the pending and the available. So the pending is anything that comes in, and the available is there. It's explicit. It's what proofs are used, or it's the state that proofs are used against. So it avoids any sort of firm right. And important to this, there are two cryptographic concepts. So we have zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption. So confidential balances would not be possible without zero-knowledge proofs. And a zero-knowledge proof is basically a process wherein one party can prove to another party that a statement is true, except they don't actually reveal that statement. And these proofs are statistically sound, complete, and secure from information leakage. And by that, we basically mean that you're not able to cheat and convince somebody of a false statement. If you're being honest, you'll eventually be able to prove that you are being honest and the statement is in fact true. And the only thing that's actually revealed by this interaction is whether the statement is true and nothing else. And there are two types of statements that we generally want to prove in zero knowledge. So those are statements about facts. So you could argue that you have a graph that can be colored in a certain way that any of its adjacent vertices don't have the same colors. It's known as the three-graph coloring problem. Or there's statements about knowledge. You could say that I know the factorialization of n. And so basically we can prove facts or knowledge about certain information in a variety of contexts in a way that is both privacy preserving, but also precise in its context. And so zero knowledge proofs generally have the same three-step setup. So the prover will generate a solution for a given computation regarding a certain statement, and then they'll send a commitment of that answer. And then the verifier will come along and they'll basically challenge it and say, here's a random value, recompute, add in that value just so I know you're not lying. And then the prover will compute the final proof based on that commitment and then the challenge. But the issue with this is this structure is inherently interactive. When the prover says they know something, the verifier has to go back and continuously challenge them, saying, okay, we'll add this, try again. And it's this big back and forth about the validity of their statement until the likelihood of them actually being tricked is negligible. And this isn't ideal for most apps because it requires single or multiple back and forth between the verifier and the prover. And there's also a number of challenges as well. So the verifier could collude with the prover, basically allowing for fake proofs. The prover could just, without any sort of collusion, generate fake proofs. And because they're going back and forth, the verifier and the prover will need to store the statement, all their secrets and whatnot, information that they want to be kept confidential. And so that could open them up to different information leakage or other attacks. But thankfully, we can use a tiny bit of fancy math to improve upon this. So there's a thing called the Fiat-Shamir heuristic, which is basically a technique for taking an interactive proof of knowledge and it compiles everything into a digital signature. So this way, some fact can be proven publicly without actually revealing the underlying information. And the idea is that instead of having the verifier go back and forth with all these random challenges, the prover can basically just compute this digital signature and then the random values added in using a good cryptographic hashing function. And so that way, we don't have to spot check a Merkle tree at 500 different indices pseudo-randomly. We can just say, hey, this is our proof. We use this function, so you can kind of verify with overwhelming probability that I'm not lying. And the other thing too is the prover has no idea what data will be revealed until it's actually committed. But of course, some of you may be thinking, random sampling, spot checking computations, even with digital signatures, can be inherently fragile. So what if the prover is malicious and then flips a single bit during the middle of a computation? Do I need to check every single piece of the computation individually without looking at the entire thing as a whole? And the answer to this is polynomials. But there's a bit of math we need to get through before we can just broadly say polynomials. So this isn't really meant to be a deep dive into the mathematical underpinnings of zero-knowledge proofs. If you're interested in that, I did write a more longer article on the Helios blog, so I highly recommend checking it out. However, some brief background is arguably necessary to actually start jumping into the math and cryptography before we just drop things like homomorphic encryption. And it may seem hard, but a lot of things in life arguably are hard just because we lack the prerequisites for it. And ZK is one of those. And so we can demystify all this weird mathematical magic by going from the basics and working our way up. And it's not too bad because the first concept that we run into is modular arithmetic, which more commonly known as like wraparound math or clock arithmetic. And basically it's a system of numeric operations where integers wrap around after hitting a certain number. And that certain number is known as the modulus. So the idea, instead of having this infinite set of numbers that we kind of have to iterate through, you have a set. And it's a lot easier and more manageable to actually work with those numbers. So consider an analog clock. I mean, I have to say analog clock, but consider an analog clock. We have the numbers 1 through 12. And if it's 11 o'clock and we're interested what 2 hours from now would be, we wouldn't get 13 o'clock. What would happen is we'd move one step from 11 to 12. And then once we hit 12 and we move another step, we'd wrap around and we'd hit 1. And we can kind of present this mathematically as 11 plus 2 equals 1 mod 12, or more formally, 13 mod 12 is 1. So basically, how many times does 12 fit in the 13? And then our answer is the remainder. And you might be more familiar with the modulo operation. So in coding languages, it would just be 13% 12 equals 1. And this is crucial to understand because it provides insights into the behavior of numbers under certain constraints. So now we can perform different computations, and it all happens within a manageable range of values, and we can define a given value. And this is especially important for us when we talk about cryptography or even just developer work in general. For example, computers and processors all have limited memory. We work with it every day with fixed size integers like U32 and U64. And so modular arithmetic ensures that values basically stay within these bounds. And we're interested in that because cryptography is a science that deals with finite sets or fixed range of numbers. And the next thing that's not too scary is functions. So a function is an expression, rule, or law that defines a relationship between two variables. It's often denoted as f of x, and more informally, you probably know them as the independent and the dependent variables, respectively. And basically what we're saying is for every x value, there's a corresponding y value, meaning that f of x doesn't really have more values for the same x. And by that, we mean that functions can either be one-to-one or many-to-one. So an x value can map to a unique y value, or an x value can map to multiple y, or the same y value. And we can also say that the domain of a function is the set of all possible inputs, and the range is the set of all possible outputs. So if we take a function like y equals 2x plus 2, I can plug in any number from negative infinity to positive infinity, and I can be sure that I get back some sort of corresponding y value. So that would be its domain. And for the range, again, it's also negative infinity to positive infinity because I'm sure that I can plug in any number for y and there would be a corresponding x value. And the interesting thing about functions is that they allow us to turn data into structured relationships. And with ZK, what we're really interested in is encoding workflows with special functions over a given set of numbers. So I have this information, I want to structure it in a certain way, and it's within these bounds. And so each step, whether that be a deposit, a transfer, a withdrawal, so forth, it just becomes another f of x that we can prove. And these special functions that we're alluding to in zero-knowledge proofs are called polynomials. So a polynomial is basically a function consisting of multiple variables and coefficients. Coefficients are just the numbers in front of the variable. And with them, we can add, subtract, multiply, divide, raise them to positive exponents. And we can even set polynomials equal to other polynomials. And they're pretty cool because you can encode arbitrarily large sets of data. So I can take any fact or statement and basically turn it into a polynomial. And they're also very easy to evaluate at a given value. For example, if x is 100, I just plug in 100 and I start solving. And more importantly, if you have two polynomials, you take the highest degree between them, and that is how many times that these polynomial functions can actually meet. And that becomes interesting when we have those polynomial equations. So if I have x squared equal to y squared, and I want to know how many times they hit each other. So x to the power 2 equals x to the power 1. 2 is higher. So I know at some point that they're going to meet twice. And things get more interesting when we start going down that route, because we can also start checking whether a polynomial equation is always true using something called the Schwartz-Zippel lemma. And things get even more interesting when you can construct polynomials that pass through certain points. And that's done via Lagrange interpolation. So basically what we're doing here is that we have these structured relationships that we can use to make global proofs. And we have the tools to build that proof, so they pass through certain points or they contain certain data. And if we go back to domain and range and we start thinking about polynomials as a list of integers, it becomes self-evident that we now have this mathematical object that contains an unbounded amount of information. And we can create this mathematical object in such a way that it passes through certain points and it's always true for given values. And so basically what we're saying here is that we can take massive, complicated sets of facts, pack them into one neat function. Then we can check every single fact instead of going one by one. And if it passes that check, then we know with overwhelming probability that every fact inside is correct. And of course, all of that is done without revealing any information. But before we actually dive into talking about working with hidden data, a quick refresher on cryptography is necessary. So encryption is basically a method for converting readable information called plaintext into unreadable information known as ciphertext. And that's done to prevent any sort of unauthorized access. And to convert between cipher and plaintext, we have to use a special key. And two common types of encryption are symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. So symmetric encryption uses a single key for both the encryption and decryption steps. And so that means both the sender and receiver must have access to that key. It can be a bit more prone to attacks since there's key sharing. However, it's very fast and efficient and used for encrypting large data sets. But asymmetric encryption is what we're more familiar with, especially in crypto. And it's interesting to us because confidential balances has to deal with asymmetric encryption. And the TLDR there is, instead of having one key, you have two keys. You have the public key, which is used for encrypting data, and then you have the private key, which is used to decrypt data. And anyone can encrypt data using your public key, but only you, the holder of the private key, can actually decrypt and see what they sent. So this ensures secure communication without any party actually needing to communicate beforehand. And up until this point, we've discussed how zero-knowledge proofs allow us to prove statements without revealing any of the underlying information. But we can actually take it a step further, and we can ask the question, what if we could not only prove data and have encrypted data, but then we could perform computations on the encrypted data without actually decrypting it. So this is exactly what homomorphic encryption enables us to do. So more formally, homomorphic encryption is a type of encryption that allows operations such as addition or subtraction, multiplication, to be carried out directly on ciphertext, so the encrypted data, producing encrypted results that when we decrypt would be exactly the same if we just performed it on the plain text. So to break that down a bit, imagine we have two numbers, 5 and 7. Typically, we'd encrypt each number separately. So you'd encrypt 5 and you get ciphertext A. The first set of encrypted data, and then you'd encrypt 7 and get ciphertext B. So if we wanted to add these using traditional encryption methods, we would have to decrypt ciphertext A and get back 5, decrypt ciphertext B and get back 7, then actually do 5 plus 7 and get 12, and then we have to encrypt 12 to get ciphertext C. However, with homomorphic encryption, we can completely skip over that decryption step and just do ciphertext A plus ciphertext B is equal to ciphertext C. And then if we wanted to decrypt ciphertext C, just to check it out, we would in fact get 12. And the ability to manipulate data while it remains encrypted is incredibly powerful. It allows us to maintain confidentiality throughout the entire lifecycle of data handling. Now we can use zero-knowledge proofs to basically prove data without revealing it, and then homomorphic encryption to update that data without revealing it. And for confidential balances, basically what this means is that we can add encrypted values together, which is really important because they are token amounts. I send you 100, I credit your account, I take 100 out of my account. All that can happen without revealing those actual amounts. And important to this are the following two concepts. So you have Peterson commitments and twisted Algamahl encryption. And so a Peterson commitment, like we said before, in terms of commitments, it's basically just a cryptographic scheme to commit a value without actually revealing it immediately. So say I had a piece of paper, I wrote down a specific number on it, I put it in an envelope and I gave it to someone else. So the number inside is hidden from everyone, including myself, until we actually open that envelope again. And the envelope is representative of a commitment. So once I commit to a value, I can't change my mind or later pretend that, oh no, I actually picked a different value. What's there is there, and it binds me to my original choice. So the other thing too is observers can't just peek inside this envelope to figure out what number I've committed to, meaning that that value actually remains concealed. And mathematically, commitments are generated using the actual value that I commit to. So let's say the number 100 plus some random number, which is known as the salt. And that's basically done to ensure randomness, that the committed value actually remains hidden. So if anybody tries tampering with it, they don't just see my actual value. And you take my number and the random value, you hash it together using a good cryptographic hashing function, and then that forms the commitment. And that basically makes it so it's borderline impossible for me to cheat or actually deny I committed that value. And so within the context of confidential balances, we use Peterson commitments for token amounts so they remain hidden but provable. I can prove that I actually have X amount of tokens without publicly saying I have X amount of tokens. And yeah, it's just nice keeping the underlying token amounts provable but not public. And with this, twisted Algamahl is just the encryption variant that we're using. And it's just used with the commitments. And the reason we do that is because we can leverage homomorphic encryption with this twisted Algamahl variant. And it's nice because it divides the encrypted information into two distinct components. So we have the Peterson commitment to the encrypted data, but we also get back this decryption handle, which is associated to a given public key. And we'll talk about this a bit later, but this kind of allows you to add public keys so you can see the encrypted amounts, but they're the only ones who can see it unless it's actually made public. And the nice thing about this is twisted Algamahl encryption greatly simplifies our zero-knowledge proofs. A lot of these proof systems are actually designed specifically for Peterson commitments, and it's nice because then we can leverage the properties of homomorphic encryption on top of that with these widely battle-tested cryptographic methods. And so basically this means that we can efficiently encrypt token amounts, we can validate transaction correctness through zero-knowledge proofs, we can also perform confidential operations, and with that decryption handle, we can actually allow for audit. And again, this is all done without actually revealing anything. Regarding the decryption handle, so users can give specific accounts read-only access to balances of particular token accounts. The mint data structure basically allows for a global auditor encryption key, and they can decrypt any confidential balance or transfer amounts under a given mint. And this auditor encryption key can be specified when the mint is first initialized using the configure mint instruction. And all confidential tokens for that mint honor the global auditor, so there's no additional setup needed. And of course, the key can be rotated or removed via an update mint instruction. And basically, this is nice because it gives regulators or third parties a way to actually see what's going on. It's a built-in compliance channel without actually exposing the on-chain amounts to the public. So as a TLDR, we can go back to the workflow there and basically say that confidential balances involve some sort of neat choreography of cryptographic methods and some fancy math. So you have the encryption step, where the sender encrypts the transfer amount using the twisted Algorithmic variant of encryption. You have the proof, so the sender will generate a zero-knowledge proof to show the encrypted transfer is valid, the amounts match, and no negative balances occur. You have your verification, so the proofs are validated without ever needing to see the plain text. And you have the settlement, which is where the recipient actually applies the balance and has it available. Cool. So how do we go about actually implementing this? Calling back to the previous slide, again, about the developer workflow, it's a bit long, clunky, but right now this is the best we have. So you can create a mint using the confidential transfer extension. Then using the same confidential transfer extension, you can create token accounts for the sender and recipient. Then you can mint tokens to the sender account, deposit the sender's public balance to the confidential pending balance. Then we apply that to the confidential available, and then we can confidentially transfer from our available to the recipient's pending token account, but the pending available balance. The recipient can then apply the pending balance to the confidential available balance, and then optionally they can withdraw the recipient's confidential available balance and make that public. So it is a lot, and unfortunately, JavaScript-based ZK proof libraries aren't here yet, and they're supposed to be coming later this year. And that presents a serious blocker for any sort of client-side proof generation, streamline compliance. So you can think of things like wallets, like Phantom, Backpack, Soulflare. It's a lot harder for them to actually introduce and implement confidential balances. So if you ever wanted to shape the future of privacy on Solana, this is an amazing opportunity for you to jump in and help out. Of course, we need better documentation, guides, tutorials, SDKs, wrappers, ergonomic APIs. It's all needed, and I can put you in touch with the lovely folks at the Solana Foundation that asked me to do this talk today. But for now, unfortunately, the implementation flow, as I said, is clunky, and it's written entirely in Rust, which tends to turn off a few people. And the full process from mint creation to the final withdraw is roughly 1,000 lines of code, which I don't think is the nicest to sit here and walk through the entire time. So instead, we're going to walk through a targeted practical code snippet of actually minting and depositing tokens confidentially. So if we switch over to our lovely code editor, the first thing I'm going to do, just so it's in the background, I'm going to start the Solana test validator. Right now, we're doing this all on locally. You could do it on mainnet, but just to make things easier, what we're doing here is we are starting the test validator. We're dumping in the updated version of the Token 2022 program. I'm also just dumping in the associated token account program because we are creating token accounts, and this is happening locally. We're also going to warp very, very far ahead, just because if we start the test validator from 0, we won't have access to these new extensions that have now gone live. And just to speed that up, we're saying we want 32 slots per epoch. Every tick per slot is going to be 8. And we're going to make gossip the local port 8001. So we can run that, and then it's going to start initializing. But in the background, while that happens, we can just walk through the code. So this is available directly on the official Solana docs. So if you want to look at it, go through it again, run it yourself, or use it on mainnet, it's all possible there. And I can provide the link later. But basically what we're doing here is we're doing a bunch of imports. So we have the Solana client, non-blocking. We import from the Solana SDK, the associated token account, SPL token account client. You can see in here we get the token 2022 program, a bunch of the confidential transfer instructions. We also need the proof extraction because we're making proofs, and Arc just to make our Rust a little bit nicer. So here we're going to start the RPC client. Just for context, I'm not using the Helios Rust SDK at all. This is just bare bones Solana, so you can pick it up and go as you please. So here, all we're saying is we want localhost 8899 to be where the client's running, and we want make sure that commitment of confirmed just to check it, make sure it's all good. The pair here, we basically have a load key pair function using the default Solana CLI function from here. And basically that's just from the default key pair path. Kept it real simple, so unfortunately, no, you guys don't get to see my private key with millions of dollars hidden away. So all this really does is we're saying, hey, this is the path. Because it's Rust, we got to open the file, and we can do it directly because it opens in bytes, but we can deserialize it into JSON, so it's a lot nicer. And then we can use that JSON to basically build the key pair from the byte array. And then we say, okay, that's cool. Then just very simple, we're making a new key pair, which will act as our mint. We're also going to be logging out the pair and the mint key pair just for nice testing purposes. Then we're going to set up the program client for the token client. And then for our actual token, we're going to say, hey, I want 9 decimals for the mint. And then here, at a high level, we're creating a token client for the token 2022 program. So basically, we pass in the program client, we pass in the token 2022 program ID from earlier that we imported. Our address for the new token mint, we're just going to pass in the pub key. We're going to say, hey, it has 9 decimals, and the payer is going to be the one that will pay for it. Then what we need to do is create the initialization parameters for the mint. And so that is done with the confidential transfer mint extension. So this is what enables that confidential private transfers. And so basically we're saying that we're passing in an authority, and this is basically a dedicated authority which manages all the confidential transfers. The next one here is an auto-approve new account. And basically what that setting does is it says that you could basically auto-approve that anybody could make a new token account, or you could say, hey, the authority needs to approve every new token account beforehand. And we don't really care about that, so we're just going to say automatically, yeah, we'll approve any sort of new confidential accounts. And then lastly, you have, it's an optional param. It's the auditor algomal public key. So it needs to be in that algomal format, passed in. And of course, this is optional, so we're just going to say none. But if we wanted to, we could have some other public key that we want to see what's actually happening and pass that in there. And then here, we're just creating and initializing the mint with the confidential transfer mint extension. So we're saying, hey, let's create the mint. The mint authority is going to be our payer. The freeze authority is also going to be our payer. Then we pass in those initialization params from earlier from the confidential transfer mint extension. And then, of course, the mint key pair is needed as a signer. And just for reference, of course, the mint authority is basically who can mint new tokens, and the freeze authority is who can freeze token accounts. Then we're going to print the results there, just, ooh, we're testing, check it out. make sure it's all good, and then we have the transaction signature there as well. And then here is where we're going to start creating and configuring the token account for the confidential transfers. So now we say, hey, we're going to get the associated token account for the owner, and we pass in the payer and then the mint, as well as the token 2022 program. And then we'll spit back out the token account address. Then from that, we're going to create the associated token account, passing in the payer who's going to be the one funding it. We pass in the payer again because they are the token account owner. And then we have to pass in the mint and then the token program ID. And then from here, we want to reallocate the token account to include space for the confidential transfer account extension, because without that, it won't be encrypted. We won't actually know that it is encrypted, and then you just end up exposing everything on chain. So here we're basically just passing in the token program ID, token account, the payer again as the token account owner, the payer again is the signer, and then the extension we're reallocating space for. Then from here, it's a bit different because, as I mentioned earlier, they have to be Algamal key pairs and like Algamal addresses, which is not standard, obviously, on Solana. So here, basically, we're just saying, hey, we have the payer, and this is their token account, and I want to create an Algamal key pair from that. And then we're also going to make an AES key, which again, we pass in the payer and the token account. And another thing too is that we can have the maximum number of deposit and transfer instructions that we can credit. And so the way it works with the pending balances is you could set a limit to say, hey, I only want 100,000, 200,000, 5, 4 interactions that happen with the pending before an automatic apply pending balance instruction is executed. So it's kind of like this nice buffer that we can kind of say, hey, because we have to do the apply step over and over, I want to wait for X amount of like interactions to happen, and then we can execute the apply step. And then, of course, we don't have any tokens, so the token balance is currently 0. And we're going to be generating the proof client side with our lovely Rust code, where we pass in the Algamal key pair, and we just want to make sure there's no errors. But we use this method, the public key validity proof data, which generates the actual proof data. And then the proof location is, I mean, it's not the cleanest way to do it, but we're basically saying, hey, let's look at a specific offset, and this is where that actual proof is located within the data. And so using that, we configure the account, we pass in the program ID, the token account, the mint, the initial balance, which is 0, the maximum pending balance credits, so how many times we can actually have those stuff happen before the apply step, any additional signers, but we don't have any because it's just very simple test from A to B, and then the proof location. And if that wasn't confusing enough, thankfully we're all done with that out of the way. And here we just combine all the instructions into a nice vector, and we then take that and make a transaction and send it off. So very standard, we get the latest block hash, we create the transaction passing in those instructions, the payer, and the recent block hash. And then here we just do a send and confirm transaction, very basic, and then we'll log out that the token account transaction was actually successful. And now finally, after all that, we can start minting tokens. And so here, the destination account is the token account public key, the mint authority against the payer, and the payer is also the one who's signing for it, authorized. And we're basically saying, hey, we want to send 100 tokens to the destination account, and you have to add in that decimal precision, unfortunately. And then we can finally say, hey, we want to deposit these tokens once they're minted. And so we're going to pass in the token account, the authority or the owner of the account, which again is the payer. And then the amount to deposit, we're just going to do the full 100 tokens for simplicity. The decimals of the token, which we earlier set as 9. and then the signers, who is the owner of the account that must sign, and that's the payer. And finally, after all that, we can deposit tokens and send them without people actually seeing. And so we have the test validator running. It's chugging along nicely. And then we can run our code. And once we run it, it's going to go pretty fast because we are using the test validator, and its epochs and ticks are, we've bumped it up a lot. And so when we look at this, we could see that we're going to use, this is our payer, this is the key pair generated, our actual mint address, and then we have the mint creation transaction signature, which we can actually check. I would plug Orb, but unfortunately we don't have local net support just yet. Well, that's always fun. Well, here, let's try the final deposit. Well, I'll have to double check that. But basically, what we did there is we said, well, we only really walked through the first couple of steps. We said, hey, we want to create this mint account. We create the token accounts for these other people, the sender and receiver, and we're going to send those 100 tokens, deposit it, it's confidential. Now nobody can see it, and we can actually do these encrypted proofs and different transfers that nobody else will actually be able to see, which is pretty cool. But as you can see, obviously, even with the demo, it's very, very clunky, and it's a work in progress. But again, crypto is not crypto without privacy, and confidential balances turns that slogan into running code that we can test today and work with. And it enables mathematically provable privacy via zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption. You have that regulator-ready controls via the global auditor system, so it's all compliant-friendly, and it's possible today. I'll bet, in Rust, clunky, doesn't necessarily work, and the configurations are all out of whack. But if that excites you, then I urge you to jump in. If you're interested, reach out. Anything from clear docs, tutorials, SDKs, or native proof libraries if you're that ambitious. And I'll connect you with the Solana Foundation crew, and we can make it happen. So let's keep building the fastest chain possible where privacy and transparency can coexist. Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah.
So you were saying that these proofs are generated client side
Yes.
at the moment, but there are no JavaScript implementations for these client side proofs. So
Yeah.
I guess, are we able to send private transactions even after minting these?
Yeah. So again, I could have done a longer, but of course, just standing here running through 1,000 lines of code isn't necessarily the most productive thing. But it's all possible via Rust today. Basically, we don't have those proof libraries in JavaScript where we could have nice functions that say, hey, let's generate this algomal key. It's like, no, you actually have to do the math, and that's when it starts to obviously get more complicated. So it is all possible today. There are longer code snippets that I can share, but for the sake of brevity and sanity, I don't think it's too smart to say, hey, this is zero-knowledge proofs, dump all this math and cryptography, then say, hey, there's this other cool stuff we do on top, like homomorphic encryption, and then jump into 1,000 lines of Rust code. So just for the sake of demo, even then it was almost 300 lines of code of actually minting, configuring, depositing tokens. But yes, and an important thing to note though is when you go from that public to pending, it is viewable on chain that hey, we had the 100 tokens and then that went dark. And so when you pull out again, it'd be like, Oh, that 100 from the like confidential, the dark tokens going public, you'd then see the 100 out. So it's kind of like Tornado Cash almost, like, except compliant and people can actually verify what's going on. The $100 in, $1 million out. It's possible, and then yeah.
How expensive is it to do this?
I mean, it's pretty similar to like any sort of like ZK compressed or like CNFT transfers. Because we have to do those proofs, we are using a lot of bytes. So anywhere from, depending on like the amount of token accounts, the actual like transfers and whatnot, you could easily max out and need multiple transfers depending on like what kind of sends, mints, burns you want to do all at once. So,
Are they compute units or
yeah, it's the transaction bytes. So it is very CU heavy because of the proof generation, but thankfully Solana is getting better. That we have, well, not the best, but more improved syscalls that kind of make this math less compute heavy, less byte heavy. So again, work in progress, but it is possible. But yeah. Sweet. So thank you. I'll be around if anybody has any questions. Thank you.